Rome, the eternal city. From first sunlight, it is preparing itself. Preparing for the most important day in its Christian calendar. Once the capital of a great empire, Rome is now the center of a living religion. The same religion which the empire tried to persecute to extinction is today embraced by some 900 million believers. One in every 5 of the world's population is a member of the Holy, Catholic and Apostolic Church. It is led by the papacy, the oldest surviving institute on earth, with a line from St. Peter to this man, John Paul II. To believers, his office symbolizes the rule of God himself over their hearts, their minds, and their consciences. It is Easter Sunday, the greatest day in the Christian calendar. Over 100,000 communicants have packed into St. Peter's Square. The blessing, Urbi et Orbi, the city of Rome and the whole world, is now shared by untold millions far away from Rome. The Philippine Islands, where the Pope's visit is still alive in the memory. Germany. Descendants of the pagan Aztecs of Mexico. The Irish monks of Glenstall Abbey.
The joy of Jesus Christ, the risen Lord and Savior of the world.
The Vicar of Christ on earth holds an audience of untold millions in today's global village faithful. Rome inherited its place as the center of the Christian church. That church was born in a distant outpost of the Roman Empire. The land of Galilee, large tracts of it unchanged in 2,000 years. In Roman times, the people lived in poverty and debt, a place of social and political discontent. It bred religious fanatics, extremists. Some congregated in communities like the Essenes of Qumran. The radicals among them were prepared to risk their lives to bring about the kingdom of their God on earth. Jesus of Nazareth was such a man. His missionary life was concentrated into some 3 years and confined here, preaching around the Lake of Galilee. Here he recruited his followers. 12 were chosen as his apostles. All were Jews, all were male. The first to be called to follow this Messiah were Galilean fishermen, the brothers Andrew and Peter. Peter is portrayed in the Gospels as warm-hearted, generous and impulsive. And down the years, he and Andrew have been as typically poor fishermen. Is this view a correct one?
We're told that Peter and Andrew were from Bethsaida and they were fishermen. That to us suggests lower class. But in fact, in the ancient world, fish was the most important source of protein, and the price of fish was the most important economic indicator that you could want. If it went above the price of meat, then the government was seriously in trouble. The most ancient encyclopedia we have gives only 12 pages to meat and almost 300 pages to fish. See? Peter's brother's name was Andrew, which is purely Greek. There's no Semitic correspondent, whereas Peter's name was Simon, which is purely Semitic. So we must assume a bilingual family, that they would have spoken both Aramaic and Greek. Okay? Then also we're told, according to the Gospels, that they had partners and employees. So they would have been part of one of the businesses in the lake.
Today, business is different. Thousands of sightseers, some devout, some inquisitive, flock here to Peter's house, over which a modern church is built. The archaeological remains, some 2,000 years old, have been remarkably well preserved. Here Jesus stayed and cured Peter's mother-in-law. But these remains are not those of a humble abode. This was clearly a large house, the home of a well-off family.
Jesus' mission was to everyone. It had a special appeal to the poor and the underprivileged. But the poor and the underprivileged don't make good assistants. Very often they don't have the education, certainly they don't have the leisure to choose from an upper middle class family with an education, with some organizational ability, with different linguistic skills, with freedom from day-to-day toil, then that is the sort of people you need as assistants. So I imagine all the people who have followed Jesus on a regular basis were of the same social class as Peter.
But Peter is special, the spokesman, even the leader of the apostles. In Matthew's account of events here at Caesarea Philippi, Jesus renames Simon Cephas, Peter the rock. He goes on to say, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." This pronouncement was to resonate down the centuries. It was the ultimate basis of papal authority. Jesus and his disciples left the Sea of Galilee. His mission had another target to meet, and that could only be met in Jerusalem. The capital of the Jews, its people subjected to Roman rule, its skyline and its ethos dominated by the temple. Jesus' message about God's rule on earth threatened the authority of the Romans and the authority of the temple establishment. Had he stayed in Galilee, it might well have been overlooked. But here, in the capital, such sentiments were dangerous. The inevitable outcome, death. It would have been stoning by the Jews. By the Romans, it was the cross. And so it seemed another radical preacher had been turned to dust. But then, the empty tomb, the resurrection, the first Easter. Here in the church at the Holy Sepulchre, built by the first Christian emperor some 300 years after the event, Christ's Passion is reverently related in mosaic. Some 2,000 years later, awesome truth attracts those who believe. But at the time, then it was a different story. Men and women who witnessed or who believed in the resurrection zealously spread Jesus' story. These followers were Jews. What they preached was a form of Jewish revivalism, and for them, this world was coming to an end. Their Judaic instincts were powerful and conservative, totally orientated to temple worship.
That strain continued in the church in Jerusalem. Peter first, and then he was succeeded by James, and they retained a very strong Jewish identity. Male children had to be circumcised, and they followed the Jewish customs of the dietary laws, for example, what food was permitted and what was not.
It seemed that Christianity would remain within Judaism, a pious and humble Jewish sect. But Jesus' ministry directly confronted both the Roman and the temple authorities. Christians were dangerous. They were to be suppressed, and leading the suppressors, the Roman Jew Saul of Tarsus. Until, that is, he himself was converted to the new faith. Immediately, there was conflict and schism.
Paul went a step further because he realized that Jesus introduced the eschaton. It was a new age, and what had been true and valuable in Judaism was now subsumed into Christ. He was the end of the law, so that for Paul, one had to choose between the law and Christ.
The church in Jerusalem chose the law. Led now by Jesus' brother James, it was doomed. Constantly persecuted, it suffered and suffered. When James himself was martyred in 62 AD, it was weakened beyond repair. To ensure the exclusion of the Christians, a formal anathema was incorporated in the synagogue liturgy. May the Nazarenes be suddenly destroyed and removed from the book of life. But it was not destroyed. Under Paul's guidance and with Peter's support, the Christian message spread abroad, and it spread quickly. Its first target of appeal were the Jewish communities abroad, estimated to be some 4 million strong. Within a few years of Jesus' death, the new religion reached the imperial capital, Rome. It was, in every sense, a cosmopolitan capital. People not only tolerated, but took a very lively interest in new forms of religion. And in old forms too. Some 50,000 Jews lived and worshipped here. It was a distinct and flourishing community. So did it influence the new Christian religion?
The earliest documents we have from Rome do read to us as though, yes, these people had close connections with liberal Greek synagogues. There were 14 synagogues in ancient Rome, and they were all financially independent. And it does look as though that sort of way of organization influenced the Christians, because the Christians also seem to have had quite a number of independent congregations meeting in private houses.
A number of congregations, then, patterned on Judaism. It was into this community that Paul arrived, the apostle of the Gentiles. But the Christian church in Rome clearly existed before his arrival. Direct proof of Peter's existence in Rome is ambiguous. There is no reliable information about his activity or the length of his stay here. But there are legends. At a time of persecution, Peter was persuaded to flee the city, and here on the Via Appia he met Jesus and called to him, Domine, quo vadis? Lord, where are you going? An 11th century church now marks the spot where he met Jesus, who, in reply to the question, said that he was going back to the city to be crucified again. Peter realized that he must face persecution himself, and he turns back to Rome to be crucified, in deference to his Saviour, crucified upside down. It's a legend, perhaps, but the faithful still venerate the spot where, marked in the stone, are the imprint of Jesus' feet. The persecution from which Peter was fleeing was real enough. It was instigated by the infamous Emperor Nero. In 64 AD, a great fire destroyed much of Rome. The citizens believed that it was no accident. Nero had made himself sufficiently unpopular to be suspected of arson. He turned to the Christians to find a scapegoat. Did these Christians not refuse to honor the Roman gods? They were hunted down and made to suffer, none more so than their leaders. Paul, a Roman citizen, was beheaded. Peter, the Jew, crucified. Maybe the absence of definite proof of Peter's existence in Rome, there is no real reason to doubt the ancient tradition that both he and Paul were put to death here. That memory is manifest most strongly on the 29th of June each year, the feast day of St. Peter and St. Paul. It is also believed that this church was built on the very site of St. Peter's tomb, and that the present Pope is truly St. Peter's successor. Can such claims be justified? Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. Christ's words look down on the high altar of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Under this high altar lie the remains of men who were the direct inheritors of that promise made by Christ to the Prince of the Apostles. This is their final resting place on earth, the Grotto of the Popes. They span the centuries. They span the countries of Western Europe. All in their time influenced, one way or another, the shaping of history. This is their burial place, located one strata, as it were, under the floor of the basilica. Go down further, and you reach the very start of the history of the popes. site of that history is also a pagan site. Dramatically discovered during the Second World War was the location of a long-forgotten pagan cemetery. There are aristocratic graves here, family shrines, decorated with the pictures of pagan gods. And here, a mysterious red wall. The excavators saw it as a boundary, marking the limit of the pagan cemetery. Beyond it, so it was believed, the tomb of Peter himself. Here, directly under the high altar of the basilica, was found a small, pillared shrine. Written accounts going back to the 2nd century record that pilgrims were shown the grave of Peter at just about this spot. Here now was proof. On the walls beside the shrine, stone tablets, one in particular, with many, many markings. Scientists have painfully deciphered the graffiti. They are clearly Christian. The M, perhaps for Mary.